welcome everyone who's joining, and thank you so much for joining us on day 2 of the 2025 North American Virtual Reference Conference. So good morning to some of you and good afternoon to others. So I'm Kristen. I'm the coordinator of the Ask Away Collaborative Chat Reference Service at the BC Electronic Library Network. And I'm joining today from the Sunshine Coast in BC, which is on the traditional and unceded territory of the Squamish Nation. So this conference is 3 half days of sessions on topics related to virtual reference and online services for all types of libraries. And our presenters are joining from all across Canada and the United States and share their expertise and working knowledge of library services, programs, and tools. And this conference, NAVROC, has been hosted every other year since 2019. And the planning committee members for this year's conference are Caitlin Kenny with Western New York Library Resources Council in Amherst, New York, who will be moderating the first session today. Kelly Doty with Tampa Bay Library Consortium in Tampa, Florida. Ginsley Mondesir with Scholars Portal at the University of Toronto in Toronto, Ontario. Sarah Pate with Washington State Library in Tumwater, Washington. Missy Williams with Delaware Division of Libraries with offices in Dover, Delaware. And Carla Fowl with Minitex at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and myself. So today we have 2 sessions, which are followed by 2 lightning talks. And there's a 10-minute break scheduled between each session and also before the back-to-back lightning talks. So to get things started, I'll hand it over to Caitlin, the moderator for today's first session.
Thank you, Kristen. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the first session of Day 2 of the 2025 North American Virtual Reference Conference. I'm Caitlin Kenny, coordinator of Ask Us 24/7, the statewide virtual reference cooperative for New York. I will be your moderator for this upcoming session. As a reminder, your video and audio have been turned off for this session. If you have questions, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. There will be time after the presentation for questions. This session will be recorded and will be available on the conference website. Our upcoming session is Take a Closer Look, the Efficacy of Dyslexia Font, presented by Bridget Fennell. Bridget Fennell is the education librarian at the University of Southern California. She is passionate about making learning in libraries evidence-based, accessible, equitable, culturally affirming, and student-centered. Bridget, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Caitlin, for that lovely introduction. Thank you, Kristen and Carla and everyone at NAVROC for giving me the opportunity to talk about accessibility in libraries. My name is Bridget Fennell. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a white woman. I'm wearing a blue shirt today and glasses. And forgive me, I might be looking off at my other screen for my notes. My accessibility experience comes from my work in instructional design, where I worked on a great team. We made graduate level curriculum. I designed it and I built it in Canvas. That's really where I built my skills and my knowledge for accessibilities. And I'd love to bring that into academic libraries. I also have a background in public libraries, in community college libraries, but really my passion is teaching and learning and accessibility in libraries. I wanted to take this chance to talk about dyslexia typefaces because I hear the topic come up in professional circles, even in accessibility webinars. And I want to just take some time to look at these and see, like, do they do what they say they do? In this section, we'll talk about how dyslexia is understood. We'll look at these typefaces that are supposedly designed to improve the reading experience for dyslexic people. We'll look at accessibility features and technological standards, and we'll see what we can do to improve the experience for our users in libraries. Before I start my presentation, though, I would love to invite you to participate in this Slido poll. asking, what is your understanding of dyslexia? So you have two options. You can take out your cell phone and snap a picture of the QR code, and that should take you right into the poll. Or you can go to slido.com and type in that number 3140, 830. But I'd love to see what your understanding of dyslexia is, because I think as a society, we have a lot of work to do to kind of catch up on what it is. And no stress if you get the answer wrong. We're all here to learn. Okay, great. So I'm seeing some answers coming in. A condition that makes the process of reading more slow, reading backwards, language processing disorder, difficulty deciphering text, and all the wonderful. There's so many answers coming in. I can't keep up with them. But when words and letters move around, mixing up letters while reading processing disability, a challenge of reading as others would, a visual disability that creates difficulty reading text, often associated with transposing characters, reading disability, switching up letters. Fabulous. Oh, and right there, brain interprets reading process differently, manifests a variety of ways. Fabulous. Thank you for participating. I just wanted to get a base level. And now we're going to see how these ideas and understandings pop up in popular culture and in the scientific literature. So in this screen, I've got a screenshot from NPR, a headline for dyslexics, a font, and a dictionary that are meant to help. And there's an image of these dyslexia typefaces. On the left-hand side, there's a few different versions of these typefaces: dyslexia, Sylexiad, Read Regular, Open Dyslexic, Lexend. Lexend looks a little different than the others, and it's kind of designed with a different idea, but they all, they purport to make the reading experience for people with dyslexia better. And here I've got a screenshot from a newspaper. Most of these typefaces are, they're available commercially for digital publishers, but individuals can also purchase them so that whenever they read something digital, this typeface will show up. I'm using the free version, and there's a link at the bottom if you want to get the free dyslexia font. And basically, you just go into your browser extensions and turn it on. So that's what it looks like. And here's some more news coverage of these popular fonts. CBS News, Boston Globe, School Librarian, and Slate. And when it's in the news like this, one would think that these are effective if the newspapers and professional journals are talking about them. So I could see how people would think that these typefaces are effective. On the left-hand side, I've got a screenshot. Henry Winkler, the actor, very famously is public about his experiences with dyslexia. And one of his books in the print edition, they use the dyslexia typeface. And it's showing up on the right-hand side in Libby. In the Libby app, under the settings, the user can go in and specify it to the text to display in Open Dyslexic. So let's talk about some of these myths. Okay, so one common myth or misunderstanding by lay people is that it's a vision problem, that it causes the letters to flip or the words to flip. So the word be, someone would see D, or the word was, someone would see it as saw. Another common, and I think this is kind of going out of date, this idea that dyslexic readers read too slowly. So if we give them exercises or typefaces to read faster, that will improve the reading experience. Reading speed is not the same as reading comprehension, though. So I've got a definition, or actually a comment from the International Dyslexia Association, and I'll just read it for you. Even when carefully explained, soundly discredited, or decisively dispatched, these and similar dyslexia myths and their vision-based suppositions seem to rise from the dead, like the villain who just won't die trope from a B movie. So then, if it's not vision-based, what is it? I have a definition from the International Dyslexia Association. I'll just kind of skim through it. It's a specific learning disability. It is neurobiological in order, and it's characterized by difficulties with accurate or fluent word recognition, poor spelling, and decoding. And these disabilities, they're not because of a deficit in cognition or because the student didn't get effective instruction. Secondary consequences include problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that can impede growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. And so it's a real threat to students. We want to make sure that they have access to evidence-based methodologies, interventions, and services so we can help them because it's going to impact their learning. So I've also got a definition from the American Psychiatric Association, from the DSM, difficulties learning to map letters with the sounds of one language. It is not primarily the result of visual, hearing, motor disabilities, or intellectual disabilities. These students are bright. It's actually very common, and it's a hidden disability, so it's going undiagnosed. I've seen statistics that it impacts between 5 to 20% of the population, and it's manifested along a continuum. It can be quite mild, and it can be really severe that it impacts the person's ability to learn. It runs in families, and it's frequently accompanied by other disabilities like dysgraphia, dyscalculia, oral language, ADHD. There's a lot of memory activity happening with the reading. So it's not uncommon that ADHD impacts memory as well. So we see these happening frequently together. There is no cure for dyslexia. However, if a person receives appropriate treatment, their brain starts to work in a way that the typical brain does. So let's talk about the brain. It's neurobiological in order. So this concept of neurodiversity, it means that um, there's no typical type of brain, that there's natural variation in function and in structure. And it comes out of the advocacy, the disability advocacy movement, which feels that these neurobiological traits can be advantageous. The term neurodiversity is not a medical term. So people who are dyslexic, they decode differently. And I saw, some people in this audience are quite familiar with this. So decoding means translating from the printed text to speech. And it involves employing knowledge and sound symbols and correspondence. And it's also involved with deciphering a new word and sounding it out. So let's look at this diagram of two different brains and the brain activity of reading. So on the left-hand side, we have a diagram of a person with a dyslexic brain. Language is processed on the left side of the brain. So you'll see that red region towards the front, the left frontal region. In a person with dyslexia, they are compensating. They're struggling with decoding, with reading, so they're figuring out alternative strategies. Whereas on the on the right diagram, which shows a non-dyslexic student, you see that brain activity is minimized. They have a lot of activity in the left temporoparietal region, which is important for phonological processing, so sound, and the grapheme-phoneme association. So the printed text and the sound of the language. And then in the back of the brain, the left occipital temporal region, orthographic processing, that's that mapping of the sound and the text. It's decoding, deciphering new words. Okay, so at the bottom, I've got a link to the California Dyslexia Guidelines. That's a great, very reader-friendly resource if you want to learn more about dyslexia. And if your population of patrons is not high school students or college students, but if they're younger, have a look at that. But you can see some of the signs of dyslexia. Again, this is hidden, and as librarians, we won't have access to, and as an academic librarian, I don't have access to student accommodations. I won't go through this entire list, but I wanted to point out a few points here. Students with dyslexia, even though they are, of average or above average intelligence, they have a self-image of low intellectual ability. This idea of inability to perform rote clerical tasks. I think of students who struggle with citation styles, MLA, APA, very rote tasks. So that's hard enough for any novice learner, but someone with a learning disability, it's even more hard. And that really is based in making sure it's the right formatting. So what can we do to support those students? Difficulty with organizing projects and time management. So as an academic librarian, we see students that have this like kind of big idea of their research topic, and they need to focus it and break it down into chunks. And then time management. So there's a lot of areas where academic librarians can improve how we support these learners, and we don't even know that they have these disabilities. Don't believe the dyslexia type. I shamelessly borrowed this title from another resource that I'm going to show you, but this is the part where we're going to look at these dyslexia typefaces and see, do they do what they say they do? All right, so let's look at, I've got a sample of a serif font on the left-hand side, and you'll see there's like a little stroke at the end of the lines. That's more typical for the printed text. In the digital space, we use mostly sans serif fonts. They're a little cleaner and they don't have that little stroke. Then I'm going to introduce you to the dyslexia typeface. So this was the first of these dyslexia typefaces. It was designed by a Dutch graphic designer, and he has dyslexia, and he frames dyslexia as that vision-based problem with flipping of the letters. So his idea was he would make the letters fatter at the bottom, giving them weight and like anchoring them to the page. And then you'll see there's this distinctive slanting downwards, which means that no two letters are the same. The slants are always different. So you shouldn't confuse those B's and D's. They're not symmetrical. However, unfortunately, there is no supporting research that he has provided on his webpage. There's a master's thesis, there's a bachelor's thesis, but any research I've seen in favor of these typefaces is not internally valid, and it's just not there. But what I want to do is I'm going to navigate away from my slide deck, and we're actually going to go look at the webpage for the dyslexia font. And I'm going to turn on my accessibility checker in my browser extension. And I see there are some errors and there are some alerts. So when I look at the details, there's 345 contrast errors. So that means if I click on a contrast error, it's a low contrast. The color of the print, there's not enough contrast with the background color. So this is telling me that the designer of this web page doesn't understand the technical standards of accessibility. Yeah, it is not good web design. Yeah. So I think that's really problematic. So there's no evidence and it's poorly designed. Okay. So let's talk about models and how we view disability. So there's the medical model of a disability where disability is a medical problem for the medical community to solve. There's a social model of disability, we'll get to that, but the functional solutions model of disability, which is where I would kind of characterize these dyslexia fonts, they identify functional limitations of a disability and they create solutions or products to overcome them. And this is a very common area for disability professionals, and there's many wonderful tools and products out there. They are results oriented, so that's some of the good things about the functional solutions model. However, entrepreneurs might create an innovative and interesting tools and solutions, but they are impractical and maybe not well informed. So I've got a quote here from Ashley Shrew. She is a disabled academic, and she wrote this fabulous book against techno-ableism. It's very short, but she is kind of describing this functional solutions model, and I'll paraphrase here. So speaking of another inventor, in this realm, she says that he says the world profoundly needs relief from disabilities imposed by today's non-existent or broken technologies. We must continually strive towards a technological future in which disability is no longer a common life experience. And then later on, she says, relief from disabilities imposed by technology, as he frames it, the problem is not that tech is created without drawing on disabled people's voices and experience, but that tech is non-existent or broken. His solution, not more thoughtful, well-informed tech, but more, better, more advanced, more expensive tech. And make no mistake, there is a market in these technologies, and it's very present in the in library vendors. As I said, there is no empirical evidence for these dyslexia typefaces. Many researchers have studied them and found that it doesn't improve reading or comprehension. Any choice to use these typefaces would be for style, but to say that they help with dyslexia would not be accurate. And I would recommend that first article by Ari because it's geared at post-secondary instructors. But really look at that second article I have from Brightspace. Brightspace is a learning management system like Canvas. And last year, they phased out Open Dyslexic as an option because it doesn't work. So if an LMS is phasing it out, then why are librarians asking for it? Or why are we duped that this is an effective accessibility tool when vendors say it is? So we talked about empirical research, but I've got some articles that are market research that confirms that readers don't like these typefaces. DQ Systems, there's a fabulous free conference. It's actually happening right now. So you can go catch the recordings of that. But there is a great session. These three designers designed a typeface for the BBC. So they talk about how do people feel, because a product feel is really important for it. And there's another article here. I think the second one is from Yahoo R&D. So they're looking at more of like the typography. So getting at this idea of emotional accessibility, two people like it. In this study, this was the DQ presentation, the typographers, so they're not disability specialists and they're not graphic designers, they know about typography. That's their expertise. But they polled over 2,200 people and did this extensive market research. And they found that for the most part, people don't like these dyslexia typefaces. I apologize, it's a little bit blurry, but you'll see, let me turn on my pointer. So they've broken it down into people with strong dyslexic traits and no dyslexic traits. So those with strong dyslexic traits, they preferred these dyslexia typefaces, somewhat to people with non-dyslexic traits. However, it's still at the bottom, down here with Comic Sans, which I think many people dislike Comic Sans. But what people do like are these sans serif fonts at the bottom. So typography. So the way that we present the text, the style, the writing style does have implications for people who are dyslexic. So I'm going to talk about some technical standards, but then what we can do in our reference resources or instructional materials to improve this. The social model of disability holds that disability is a socially created problem due to complex factors in the environment, not the individual. And people with disabilities should be able to fully participate in society. It's up to us as universities, as governments, as companies to consider the needs of disabled people from the onset. So things should be born accessible. The focus is on disabling conditions in the society. So I've got an image of the curb cut effect about barriers in the built environment. We are centering the disabled person. So the curb cut is put in there for someone who uses a wheelchair, but that impacts and benefits someone who's using a stroller, someone who's using wheeled luggage. So when we design the environment to accommodate these disabilities, it actually impacts and benefits everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about technical accessibility guidelines. You don't need to know these guidelines. I just want you to know that there's an international standard for digital accessibility. I will show you style guidelines and practices that you can implement, but I want to introduce you to the concept. So web content accessibility guidelines have been around for over 20 years, and they keep improving as tech becomes more advanced. But they're technological specifications to make digital content accessible. They're mostly for people with physical disabilities, people who are blind, low vision, deafness, and hearing loss, but there are some accommodations for people with cognitive disabilities or learning disabilities. And again, like the built environment and the curb cuts, when we improve our web for people with disabilities, we're improving it for everyone. I've got a link to the WAVE accessibility evaluation tool if you want to download it and or install it. It's pretty easy, and there's a video, so you can go and explore that on your own. So these are the current success criterions for accessibility. They're arranged by how the user perceives the content, so how they're seeing it or kind of taking in the content. Operating, so how someone interacts with the digital content, and then how they understand it. So again, you don't need to know all these criteria. I'm going to show you how they show up in practices that we can use. But it has to do with, we saw the color contrast, the color of the print against the background. Can the user easily resize the text to make it bigger? Visual presentation is the text content, text contrast. Timing and is the timing adjustable? So people with disabilities, everything just takes longer. It takes longer, as someone pointed out in Slido, to process that text. So let's give users enough time to complete what they need to do, whether it's reading something or filling out something. We always want to give our users more control. And I'm going to talk about headings and labels shortly. Notice there's nothing that says a certain font or typeface is better, but there is a little recommendation that fonts with extraordinarily thin strokes or unusual features, which I would say dyslexia, that it is unusual. It's not familiar. Those types of fonts, they're harder to read. All right, so let's look at library resources. So I'm going to show you some digital resources that I come in contact with as an academic librarian. Maybe you have some of these as well. And the first one is Gale eBooks. So anything that is in the EPUB format has more accessibility options. It's just more flexible than PDFs. PDFs are notoriously inaccessible. So in Gale eBooks, the user can turn on text to speech. and the text will be read to them. And there's lots of controls you'll see here. Let me just turn on my laser pointer. It does this, it follows along. So it highlights the passage that's being read, and this is the word that it was currently reading. And under the settings menu, you can change the size of the type. This is the speed of the playback. You can even change the color of the words or the highlighting, whatever the user prefers. So that's a great feature in Gale eBooks. Sage has some great accessibility features. There's a pagination feature here. A lot of times when the reader is scrolling through a lot of text, and when it's not a PDF, of course, you can see what page you're on, but the reader might get lost. So anything that allows the reader to know where they are in a passage is helpful. Sage also has the adjustable font size built in. There's no third-party software they need to use. It's just right there. And then in Sage Journals, this is the EPUB format. The default font is this sans serif font, which is more legible for all users, but they can have a serif, and you'll see we've got our dyslexic fonts here as well. You can change the alignment to be left aligned, which is best, or it can be justified, and you can work with the reading flow. We are now looking at O'Reilly Online Learning's product. At the bottom, they have this progress bar. So again, the reader can see where they are in the document. And then over on the settings gear, the user can change the size of the font, the color mode. This middle black text on an off-white background is best for someone who's dyslexic. Dark mode is not great for someone who's dyslexic, but maybe someone's in a dark environment, so they want that dark mode. Again, it's all about giving the users choices. The user can adjust the width of the column, and they can select a different font family, and we're seeing Open Dyslexic is popping up there. EBSCO, they don't seem to have as many features for dyslexic users as the others do. They do talk about the fonts, and this is copied verbatim from EBSCO's page website, but they say that these fonts are known to work well for dyslexic users. There is some text-to-speech tools, but those are third-party, so the user would have to go and download that to get that to work for them. Opposing viewpoints. I love opposing viewpoints so much for my first-year students. And I've always kind of, as an instructional designer, this is really important to kind of minimize cognitive load. But having these main ideas bulleted. So I always tell students, in fact, I tell faculty to tell their students to read these bullet points because it's going to prime them as they get into the text. They're kind of familiar with the concepts. So it increases reading comprehension. Okay, so we looked at library resources that we are subscribing to, we are purchasing. What can we do to make our content more accessible? So I've got links from the British Dyslexia Association. They have a style guideline. I like that it's very clean. It's almost like a checklist because there's a lot. So it's good to have everything in one place that we can kind of use to check over our work. You have the links in the slide deck. It's available as HTML or a PDF, but most of these guidelines are informed by WCAG standards. So headings and emphasis. A heading structure is super important for accessibility, not just for someone who's dyslexic, we do, or the general reader, we want to organize and give headings for emphasis. But for someone who uses a screen reader who's blind or has low vision, the heading structure helps them navigate a page and focus in on what they want to read. So it's important to use the built-in formatting tools. I've got a screenshot here from LibGuides, but these formatting tools are in your word processing software, Google Docs, Word. So learn how to use these. You can use larger font sizes in bold, or sentence case. Do not use all caps. Boxes and borders are okay, but don't use underlining. Underlining is hard to read, and also that's a convention that indicates it's a hyperlink. Italics are also hard to read. And avoid large blocks of text. White space, being concise, is your reader's friend because we don't want to overwhelm them. The layout. So I've got on the right hand side, I'm using Chappell Roan's song to demonstrate the text aligns with the left hand side, and it's kind of a ragged edge. It's not justified, which is aligned on both sides. That's really hard to read. And now with social media and newsletters, I'm seeing a lot of like MailChimp and other software, they automatically do centered text. I'm seeing centered text and LibGuides. This is really hard to read. So we want to shoot for this left aligned. And this isn't new. We've been doing this, if you've had to write a paper in school and used MLA or APA or Chicago, this is the same stuff. You don't want the lines to be too long. You don't want to cramp it. And that's why those features that allow the user to space out text is really great. Using 1.5 line spacing, this is called leading. That's also helpful. And try to start a sentence at the end of a line. Bullet points. So I showed you using the built-in formatting tools for a heading structure. Use those tools for bullet points or numbered lists. Again, don't manually type in the bullet or a hyphen. Allow the word processing software or LibGuides or whatever tool in slide deck and in actually right here. These are all formatted with the formatting tool. Because this is also important for people with who use screen readers. Don't use multiple columns. I think this is kind of a holdover from earlier times with LibGuides, and it goes back to newspapers where you'd see columns. Really, you want to use one column, and I would recommend that your LibGuides administrator kind of make this kind of a universal style for the organization. Give everyone notice that you're going to move to this style. But in LibGuides under layout, you can specify one column. It's something I'm new at my organization. I'm slowly undoing these multiple columns because let's face it, different people inherit these LibGuides and I'm a little hesitant to take away things, but sometimes they really need a refresh because we need to be accessible, and our understanding and the laws around accessibility are changing. I'll say really quickly, I forgot to mention this, the Americans with Disabilities Act, Title II, which deals with digital accessibility, there's going to be new guidelines where we will need anyone who receives federal funding. So that's colleges, K-12, public libraries. You will need to bring your resources into AA compliance. And our vendors will need to be compliant as well. And that's coming up in about a year. So media, so use simple. I saw there was a question about fonts. So simple fonts, plain, evenly spaced, sans serif fonts like Arial are great. Don't use a lot of fonts. Be careful if you're working in Canva. It gives you all those wonderful fonts. They're hard to read, so just consider that. I've got a link for a color contrast checker. Bold the key terminology, make sure the text isn't too crowded. But I think if you stay with a sans serif font, you should be okay. Use a dark colored text on a light background. That white can create glare. Don't put your text in an image. Your text should be printed and accessible as a screen reader. Learn about doing alternative text, but really avoid doing text as images. Avoid italics, underlining, all caps, bold is okay. Avoid any content that blinks or moves. If it's blinking too fast, which is really fast, it can cause a seizure. Always give your users the options to turn off scrolling text or like a carousel. Let them pause it because again, it's all about giving them time to read it or complete what they're trying to do on that, whatever the digital resource is. Okay, writing style. So use short, simple sentences in a direct style. And these are uh, recommendations that would be great for someone who has ADHD, an English language learner, someone with traumatic brain injury, someone who's autistic. Like these are kind of universal guidelines. Give instructions clearly. Because dyslexia is a language processing disorder, they can have a difficult time with auditory language as well. So be very clear, avoid long, verbose explanations or long verbose libguides. Use active rather than passive voice. Don't use double negatives. They are confusing. Be concise and then summarize those main points. If you are working in social media, I've got this example of a traditional hashtag with no capitalization is difficult to read. Camel case, the first letter is lowercase, but every time there's a new word, then it's capitalized. So that's a little easier to read. I like Pascal case because every word is capitalized, much easier to read. And this actually improves functionality for screen readers, for people who use assistive technology to read the printed content. So this really is ideal. And I've got a link to a funny story about, a difficult to read hashtag where people thought Cher had died, but it was Margaret Thatcher who had died. So I'll let you read that on your own. Making accessible library learning materials. Use plain language, eliminate jargon. My students, they don't know what empirical means or peer reviewed, even database. I have to explain the concept of a database to my faculty. So always start by defining terminology. Use graphic organizers. Remember executive functioning and like breaking things down into small chunks. I want to shout out to Amy Dye Reeves, did an amazing presentation. I've linked to that in NAVROC a couple years ago about she used Jamboards to co-construct kind of notes during the reference interview. Jamboard is gone, but I've used this technique in, I use Google Docs. So writing, putting, pre-filling out some resources or what they need to do, and then kind of co-constructing keywords or strategies. My students love this. Make better libguides. I've got a couple articles here, and I really love this Reeb and Gibbons guide, and Bergstrom Lynch talked about this. Sometimes our libguides are, they showcase our expertise, what we know. So we kind of chock them full of maybe some extraneous materials. They're librarian centered. We use them as evidence for annual review. So flip that around. Make your resources user centered. What can users do from the resources that you share with them? So there's some great articles there. I have a strong instruction background. I believe that quality instructional design can solve so many problems, but learn how to create properly structured learning objectives. So that's getting at Bloom's taxonomy of learning, Bloom's verbs. Even if you don't do a lot of instruction, you can pull this into developing your LibGuides or your tutorials. This is a great resource for writing learning objectives. It's geared more at like curriculum, but the principles apply to one shots. We do single units of instruction. And then I've got some great resources that are library specific, whether it's in instruction or in online tutorials. I think these are great kind of primers into learning objectives. Okay, interpersonal considerations. Always try and determine if your learners or your patrons have an accommodation. So if you're reaching out to faculty about, talking about instruction, ask, are there accommodations that you should be aware of? Or maybe allow your students to tell you that. I do a lot of digital reference consultations. So, allow them to let you know what they need you to do. Don't ask what their disability is because it's rude and but also that it doesn't help me if someone tells me what their disability is. Tell me what I need to do to help them. If you're doing instructional sessions, don't call on people. You know about library anxiety, and it can be very stressful to be called on. So always ask for volunteers. And really importantly, just create a learning environment that, making a mistake, it's not punitive, but that's an opportunity to learn. Once you make a mistake, that's where you're going to learn about something. So really kind of create safe learning environments and focus on, use a strengths and an assets-based approach rather than the deficits of a disability. So we're kind of winding it down, but I've got this image of Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz and her beautiful ruby red slippers, and this quote from Glinda: "You've always had the power, my dear. You just had to learn it for yourself." So Dorothy didn't need those ruby slippers. Slippers. I mean, they're gorgeous. If you want to buy the cute shoes, buy the cute shoes. You don't need the dyslexia type faces. Um, Learners can go and install the browser extension. But I guess my concern is that when vendors are saying we use these typefaces, we are satisfying accessibility criteria, we need to push back and ask them to be WCAG 2.2 compliant. So just to kind of wrap it up, these typefaces, they're not empirically backed, and market research shows that people don't love them. When we use them in our social media, or I've seen some discussions of these in academic literature, in librarian journals for academic librarians. I think when we continue to use these, because they're not evidence-based, we are undermining our own authority. And we need to push back with publishers, data aggregators, to look at these national WCAG standards. They are covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Again, you don't need to memorize them, but someone in your organization hopefully is working on web accessibility and offering training, offering support. Accessibility, it's overwhelming. I'll be honest. There's a lot that we need to remediate and correct. Ideally, things can be born accessible from the beginning. Going back and remediating takes a lot of time, and we don't have the time for that. But do something small. And what I've shown you for the most part, they're skills that you already are familiar with and that you can do. And if we all do make these small changes, they add up to big impact. And lastly, accessibility is everyone's responsibility. I have some resources for you. If you're interested in the ADA Title II revisions, which means that we need to be accessible, the Library Accessibility Alliance it's geared at academic libraries, but it's really a great resource if you're not aware of it. And I've got a list of references. And thank you. Thank you to NAVROC for giving me the opportunity to talk about accessibility. It's like one of my favorite things. Thank you to everyone who's here to learn. I haven't been looking at the chat, but I really appreciate your interest in this topic. I hope it was helpful. I sense that a few of you probably are familiar with these concepts, so maybe you learned something new. But I will now, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Bridget. This was fantastic. One of the questions that I promised to answer for someone was, how did you access the laser pointer on your presentation? I thought maybe you were using the annotate tool, but I don't think you are. Can you just demonstrate that really quick?
Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
All right, so I'm using Google Slides. I love Google Slides. I am not a PowerPoint person, but can you see that there's like a little toolbar here? You might not be able to
Yes.
see it. So yeah, when I click on these three dots, then I get a menu that pops up, and I can turn on the laser pointer. Can you see that?
Yes.
So I'm turning it on, and I'm turning it off. And you can get the pen and mark it up. Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't know that was a feature either, so I appreciate learning about it. We've had a few questions. There are a few more coming in, and for anyone who joined us during the presentation, please feel free to ask questions using the Q&A feature. You covered a little bit of research about fonts and dyslexia. Is there research or a lot of research out there about how different typefaces affect people with dyslexia, or other potential solutions for dyslexia? Where could people go to learn more?
Yeah, I think I did link.
I think you did too. Okay.
Yeah, so this one, I think this guy's at Yahoo. So you might look at these. And look at these articles as well.
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah.
And someone else asks, because of that chart you showed about the different fonts, it's in the slide before this one. Someone wanted to know if sans serif fonts are generally better for people with dyslexia, or is that another myth about typefaces?
Honestly, I can't remember if I think that the articles do say that sans serif are better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And someone else wanted to know if MS Word documents are better than PDFs as far as accessibility. I know with PDFs you can have a reader, but I think you can in Word as well.
So accessibility is a really big thing. Anything that is in Word, you can have an accessibility checker. So use the heading structure in Word and in Google Docs. Check it. There's so much. I mean, tables need to be done a certain way to be accessible. So I'd say Word is great if you take some time to learn about them. If you are saving your word processing document for PDF, there's a way to do it so it is accessible, but and off the top of my head, I'd have to walk through and do it. I know if you you can save it for PDF for like digital purposes, then the links are active but yeah, PDFs can be. I mean, I was advised not to use them. If you look at the Do-It Center at the University of Washington, they're a phenomenal resource. They talk about PDFs like to avoid using them, but I think in the past 5 years, as we are forced to become more compliant, I'm hoping we're getting better. Look and see if PDFs are a nightmare for a screen order. It has to do with like, are they tagged? Is the reading order correct? So Word documents and Google documents are better, but as long as they are made in an accessible way. It's a complicated question.
Yes,
Yeah, but just start
there are a lot of
somewhere.
layers.
Yeah.
Yes. So last question before we take our break. It's a fun one. What are your favorite fonts?
Calibri.
That's a
Yeah,
good
I don't know
one.
why. That's what I remember there was some federal arm that decided that Calibri was going to be their accessible font, so I think I just used that. I can't stand Times New Roman. I don't think I have a favorite, but I know what I don't like.
That works. We do have a couple more questions, but I don't know if we have time to get into them. Carla, Kristen, I know that we do have a break coming up before the next session. But you know what, I'll email you and then maybe we can send that out to the presenters and a follow-up.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna go back to no, sorry. My information is here. Super easy,
Yeah,
bfanel@usc.edu. So reach out to me. I love to talk about accessibility.
perfect. Thank you so much, Bridget. This was a great presentation and thank you for being here.
Thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Bye.